Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you for tuning into one of our talks today. Today, I'm so thrilled to be talking about the fantastic Peacock TV series Dr. Death with actor Dominic Burgess. And I wanted to talk about the research that you did in listening to the podcast and getting the opportunity to hear Jerry speak a little bit, because you've spoken about how one of the challenges is that there wasn't very much video of him. And even in the podcast, he had such loyalty to Christopher right up until the end. And so even within the podcast, he only features a little bit. But within the details that you had available to him, I was interested in how you found his voice as a character, even just listening to the minutiae of the way that he spoke and his cadence and his tone of voice, because it sounds like you started that process even when you were in the audition stage of getting this role.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's more footage of him now. I think Peacock did a complimentary series that went along with it, and I think Wondery was able to track him down after that first series of the podcast. But at the time, there wasn't a lot, and the only point of reference that I had was, after he'd been through the trauma and his surgeries, and he was in the chair, and so I think his voice was affected anyway because he'd had so much trauma to his neck and he didn't have the muscle support. So the entry point, I think, was listening to how people talked about him. I tracked him down on Twitter, and yeah, he was big and gregarious and tactile and friendly, and I think bringing that physicality in, and the auditions that I initially did over Zoom with Maggie, who directed the first two episodes, and Patrick McManus, was an exploration of that. At first we were doing a scene in a strip club, and we did the scene, and then they were like, "Great, great." And now let's do on standing, and let's do on dancing, and let's get the physicality in there. Um, so I think that was part of the exploration. And then I think once we reached the end of the series and we were doing the episodes that were in the chair, then it was resting more on the vocal cords, and the voice changed a little. There was um a little more gravel to the voice, and because you're not at liberty to move and play physically. So I think there's a little bit of distinction, but yeah, the entry point was his loyalty and his friendliness, I think.
Yeah, and you were bringing up Maggie Kiley there, who directed the first couple of episodes, and Patrick, the showrunner. And, all of the directors on this are really fantastic. But in particular, I was interested in working with Maggie and Patrick on those first couple of episodes, because that really sets the overall voice of the entire series. And,
Hmm.
they're both so good at coming in and shaping such distinct tones for within television. And I know that one of the things that was important to you throughout the whole series was never having Jerry be someone who was the butt of the joke, or there as a
Yeah.
comedic element, or making light of his situation and everything that he went through. So
Hmm.
how did that lead into a lot of the conversations that you were having with the two of them as you were all figuring out not just the voice of the show, but also how you really wanted to approach Jerry as a character in this?
Yeah, like you said, I said from the outset that I didn't want Jerry's sort of openness, and um even though he was blind to what Christopher Duntsch was doing and he was his friend, I didn't want him to come across as someone that the audience would say, "Oh my gosh, this guy is so dumb. Why can't he see what's going on?" Um, bearing in mind that Jerry wasn't in the operating theater, and he wasn't in the hospital, and he wasn't in the meetings that Christopher was having with the patients. The only thing that Jerry was seeing was this friend who was on a meteoric rise, who was saying, "Oh my God, come and live with me. Oh my God, take these drugs with me. We're going to have a great time." And so he was swept up in Christopher Dunch's world. So to Jerry, he was kind, and he was accepting of him when other people might not have been accepting of Jerry. But yeah, I never wanted Jerry to be the butt of the joke, to have people look at him with any kind of condescension or anything like that. And I didn't want to play anything for jokes, even though he is big and he's friendly and he doesn't understand this medical world. Um, and yeah, we chatted about that with with Maggie on that first night that I shot, which was at the house party where he's in the cap and he's big and he's got this green jacket on and he's driving a car with flames down the side and he is larger than life. And so it was about finding that grounding for him rather than letting him get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, and you're playing him obviously over the course of several years. I think at the beginning, we see him all the way going back to the 90s into the 2010s. And I thought the costumes were quite interesting as well. There's always kind of still a very linear aesthetic through the outfits that he's wearing and that one gold chain necklace that he has on through
Mhm.
so many of the scenes across the years. And so I was very curious about where some of the specific detailing of that came from.
We went through so many wardrobe choices. Matthew was the costume designer, and oh my gosh, there were so many out there choices, polos and dungarees, so many caps, so bigger, thicker chains that we went through. And then it really came down to the directors, Maggie and Jennifer, and the choices that they were making. Um, and it was a conversation we actually had with Matthew a little bit later on, was making sure that the wardrobe choices were tracking because, like you say, he starts out in that green leather jacket and the backward cap, and then there's the stars and stripes polo, and we came to the consensus that as Baylor Plano opened and the surgery got up and running, that he would try and fit in. And so then the smart khaki pants came in and the plaid button down shirts. But there is the very last episode, episode 8, when we're trying to put together this television feature. I have a pocket square, this sort of three-pronged pocket square. And that is where I did put up a fight. I was like, he's got to wear the pocket square. And so was like, no, it's too much. And I was like, it's not enough. He's in this business environment, but he doesn't know. And I really fought for the pocket square, and the pocket square won. Patrick was the deciding vote. He was like, if he likes the pocket square, let him wear the pocket square. And he wore the pocket square.
I love it because even the detail of that pocket square is part of how, like you said before, he doesn't actually know the medical world, but he's
Hmm.
so willing to try and learn everything and figure it out
Oh
and come
yeah.
in with 100 ideas. He's like, I've gotten you an award. We're going to do this on the
Hmm.
website. And so, how did you approach that side of where he's coming in and where he's figuring out ideas and what you felt he would learn from having been friends with Christopher, from starting to work with him when he's opening up his own practice, and where you felt, he would fall short, not because of his own fault, but just through a lack of experience in the field that he's suddenly, an executive marketing director within?
Yeah, I think of Jerry like a Labrador retriever who is he's there and he's ready and he's gonna give his best, and he doesn't understand, even down to the pocket square. I'm sure he looked at that and thought, oh yeah, pocket squares they're fancy, they're in. I'm gonna wear this, people are gonna respect me. But it's just his taste level that is just off. But it's not his intention that is off. I think his intention is always right there to help Christopher, to be there for him. And I think where Jerry draws the line, and we see it a couple of times in the series, he's always there for Christopher. But when he starts to talk ill of Wendy, or he starts to put other people down, is where Jerry's alarm bells do start to ring. And he says, hey, why did you say all that bad stuff about Wendy? Hey, I don't agree with this, what you're doing. So I think there's a real moral compass to Jerry that really stayed the course. As Christopher was casting Wendy aside, Jerry was still there and supportive of her and driving her to Babies R Us. And even though he didn't agree with what Chris was doing, he would speak up about those things. So yeah, I do think about Jerry as sort of the moral compass that Chris was lacking.
And the storyline with Wendy also speaks to Jerry's own personal history because he was raised by a single parent because of a father who left as well. So he sees that trajectory playing out right in front of him and feels that he has an
Hmm.
opportunity to stop it. How much information did you have kind of going back to details that were available about Jerry, about his own kind of personal family backstory and upbringing versus where were the spaces that you had to fill in a little bit more and do a little bit more traditional character development?
Sure. You know, because the series is fictionalized, there are a lot of things that might change or to enhance the drama or that might not necessarily ring true. If you listen to the podcast, Jerry had a girlfriend at the time and she doesn't feature in the show at all. It's again, it's a conversation I had um with Jen because she was directing those scenes. And Jen's angle was that Jerry should be more focused and really tell him how it is in that scene. Um, so it's tough because Jerry didn't put all that information out there on his Twitter and it wasn't in the podcast. And so sometimes you put your faith in the showrunner's hands and say, okay, if this is what happened, great. If this is now a fictionalized version of events, then we'll run with that. And it's a conversation I'd had with Ryan Murphy when we did Feud as well, where I was playing Victor Buono about where that line is between what is real and what is fictionalized and what is enhanced and what is really sort of twisted and turned into something else. So ultimately, I think it's really putting your faith in the words and what the showrunner is envisioning as a whole um, is where I would say that lies.
And in working with Joshua Jackson, their characters, sorry, both of your characters' friendships goes all the way back to having known each other as teenagers in high school. There's mention that, they kind of went their own way for a little bit, but they've clearly been in each other's pockets for years, even when we first kind of meet them in the show. And so how did the two of you want to shape that? Because you do it down to a point where, we see a lot of dialogue exchanges, but we also see that quietness in between of the two of them can just sit on a chair comfortably and they don't always need to say something out loud to each other because they have that history with each other. And I thought the two of you captured that really well together.
Well, thank you. Um, it's so funny because we filmed during COVID, and so there wasn't I guess the rehearsal and the prep that you might normally have in a show. The very first time we met, we met to do photographs on a sports field, and it was like Josh, Dominic, Josh. All right, we're gonna go take some pictures. We're your best friends, and then sort of being thrown into this camaraderie where you've got your arms around each other and you're laughing, and you've got the little red beer cups, and I think it's a testament to Josh, who is so disarming as a human being that he throws himself into that. And then maybe that sitting in silence, I don't know. I think I think maybe that's something that comes, and I'm putting words into young actors' mouths, and I shouldn't. I know me as a younger actor might have wanted to fill negative space with something, whether it's something physical or vocal, or feeling the pressure to improvise because the cameras are rolling and we're not doing anything. And I think maybe that's something that comes with the experience of, no, the camera's rolling, but you're just existing in this space and it's fine to just sit in silence. Whereas 21-year-old me probably would have been trying to like, oh, I've got to say something funny. I've got to put a tag on the end of the scene, or I better do something funny with my hands. Um, that's a really interesting question that I hadn't ever gotten before. So thank you for that question.
You
Maybe
were
it's an
bringing
experience thing. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I can completely see that it's something that just you become more comfortable with more experience. And you were bringing up there also the COVID restrictions, obviously, which were part of filming. And I wanted to ask you about that in relation to going and sitting in Video Village and really observing what's happening, even in scenes where you're not present character wise, because it sounds like that's something that you were able to do a little bit later on in filming.
Hmm.
And so I was interested in whether that's something that you frequently do when you're on set, whether it's something where you always just want to be there any opportunity you're on set whenever you're not filming, and what are the details that you're looking for in other scenes.
Um, yeah. Oh boy, I love sitting in Video Village. It's my favorite thing to do. And since COVID, it's just really not. It's really not the done thing anymore, especially if you're filming indoors and it's a confined space and they just don't want the bodies there. I was able to do it towards the end of Dr. Death as sort of we were coming out of that wave. And I was watching a lot of the surgery scenes where they were operating on sort of the foam version of my body, just from a fascinated sort of, oh, I want to see how they use the body doubles and how they film these surgical scenes. But I love being in Video Village. If it's not the scenes that I'm in, then I always like to ask if I'm filming later in the day and I'm on a new show, just to go so I can see the pace that everything is moving at, the way that things are being shot, the tone of the show. If it's a brand new show, if it's a limited series or it's something that hasn't aired yet, then sometimes you don't get the tone that the show might be. And so I just like to see and think, maybe they are filming those scenes where people are sitting in silence and there's that space. Or if it's a comedy, maybe things are just quick fire and people are at liberty to ad lib there at the end. But I love it, and you learn so much. And even on this show, Wendy, who was the script supervisor, um, she was saying she was using iPads for the first time and she was able to double click and take still frames so that she could track like, oh, yeah, he's holding the cup on this line in this hand and he's holding it in his left hand and then he's opening the door with his right hand and I can tap every time someone makes a physical movement and then I've got a record of it. Um, yeah, and I just like asking questions and just absorbing everything I can like a sponge.
Yeah. And going back to talking about Jerry's experience with surgery and going under the knife with Christopher, even prior to that, there's the fact that he has been living with chronic pain in his neck that's been, elevated over the years. How did you want to manifest that into your performance even before he goes under the surgery and becomes paraplegic because of what's been botched up? There's detailing to it even earlier, particularly kind of going back to the physicality of the role at that point.
Yeah. Um, We mentioned it, I think it made an actual mention in the script, I think in episode 3. And then I mentioned to Jen and so that at some point, just a little neck tick would be enough to show that it's there without then Jerry saying, hey, perform surgery on my neck, without the audience being like, wait a minute, hold on. That's crazy. So he did want to lay the foundation that it is something that he was dealing with, but it was still an elective surgery. It was still something that he was living with, and it was managed with maybe pain medication, or that's something that he was dealing with, and that he really just put his whole faith in Christopher Duntsch. And I think it lends to the tragedy all the more so was all of these patients went in for the most part able-bodied and came out worse than they went in, which I think is terrifying.
And he put his faith in him to the point where he didn't just go in for surgery once. He went under the knife with
Twice.
Christopher Duntsch twice.
Hmm.
And both of those scenes where you're playing Jerry and you're laying in the bed, there's such different responses each time as he's starting to figure out for him, all the pieces are coming together. He's also
Hmm.
just going through that stress and anxiety of realizing that he can't move his entire body. And the first time he still has a little bit of movement, and then the second time there's just absolutely nothing. So how did you want to approach both of those scenes, having, thinking about the similarities between the two of them, but also the fact that they're very different emotional trajectories for him, because the second one is just utterly heartbreaking.
Yeah. Um, I think I think the seed is planted in at the end of episode 5 as Molly is driving them to the hospital, and she's like, "Hey, she knows what's coming, and Kim knows what's coming," as he's there on the operating table, and somewhere subconsciously, I think maybe Jerry even knows, like, even though he's not a statistician, he knows that, there have been problems. And yeah, I think that first scene when he wakes up, I think there's a part of him that still really believes that Chris can fix him, that he doesn't want another doctor, that he doesn't want anyone else to come and look at him, that it has to be Chris, that Chris wouldn't lie to him. And then after the second surgery, I think it is that devastation and that realization. And, you know, I've been in situations myself, and I'm sure other people have been in situations themselves where, I don't speak up if it can be as something as simple as getting a food order delivered wrong to your table, and it's like, oh no, I'm not gonna say anything. I'm not gonna make a fuss. And now on a macroscopic level, knowing that he's been through surgery and he can only move a little bit, but no, it's okay, because no, Chris is gonna make everything okay. Um, and yeah, that guilt, self-loathing of not speaking up, and the signs were there and he just didn't take them. Yeah, it's tough. What a terrible situation for him to be in.
And with the fact that the only moment where he deviates from that loyalty, even after all of that, we see it later in the court scene where he hasn't even seen Christopher. Christopher hasn't shown up for him at all, and he still
Hmm.
says, "I love you." And the one moment that he deviates is when he's laying in the hospital bed and he starts saying, "We were doing cocaine the night before the surgery, and
Yeah.
I know exactly what's up, and other people need to know this." What did you think was that momentary breaking point? And then what did you think it was that reeled him back into still just having that optimistic belief in his friend, even when his friend isn't around anymore?
Gosh, that's a good question. That's a good question. Um, I think Jerry sees the best in everybody. He really does. And I think, yeah, he has that momentary break. And it's a conversation that we had with Patrick, Josh and Patrick and I, because there is the scene where the night before the surgery, Jerry goes up to his room and he's like, "Yeah, I guess I should get that early night." And Chris is like, "Yeah, we could." Or, and it was something that Patrick said we were never explicitly allowed to show whether they did or they didn't, um, because there is no concrete evidence, and so it was left in that sort of gray region. In my heart, I think I played it as they did, and then as a way to get Chris to come down and talk to him, and then that guilt thing again from Jerry when Chris comes in and he says, "You've ruined everything for me." And I think those words of, oh my gosh, am I responsible for the dissolution of Chris's business and everything going wrong, and now this trajectory where he's he's being pulled through the courts because he did love him. He right to the end, he said that he would have loved to have just gone for a beer and hung out. And yeah, he did go back on what he said out of love. I mean, I don't know if I, as a human being, as Dominic, would ever be so forgiving. But that's what Jerry is and was, and yeah.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. And then when we look at the later court scenes, the delivery of your performance is so different from when you look at the trajectory from the beginning of the show, going back to like the exuberance, the optimism, like we're going on a night out, we're going to the strip club, everything's going to be great. And even the dialogue is really sparse when he's giving testimony and he's barely talking. And like you said before, you know, obviously physically his voice has changed because of the pressure on his neck as well. So how did you set about finding where you felt Jerry was within his headspace? Because again, it's like he's still holding onto that optimism through the things that he's saying and that friendship and that love. But at the same time, he has been beaten down and broken by the world. And you really just feel that in watching those scenes at the end.
Yeah. Again, I think it comes down to Jerry's character of he is a helper and he wants to help people, and at this point he knows that other people have been through this experience, and so he doesn't want other people to get hurt, and he knows what the right thing to do, but he's so torn because he does love his friend and his friend is sitting right there. And so this information, I feel like, is being pulled out of him. In real life, in the actual course of events, Jerry gave video testimony. He didn't actually go into the courthouse. So I think that might have been a different dynamic, but with Josh sitting right there, sorry, my voice has gone hoarse now. I'm sitting on my vocal cords. With Josh sitting right there, it really lends itself to this dichotomy of what the right thing to do is. Yeah, it's tough. And as a performer, it's tough because I'm very physically active. I'm always doing stuff with my body and my hands. And so it was a real lesson for me. You'll hear directors, especially movie directors, saying, stillness is power. And yeah, that was a real lesson for me to really physically not inhabit my body and to have everything just here. Um, yeah, that was something for me to focus on too.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to watch those scenes, exactly what you were saying with the stillness that's required. And I think overall with the series, like really incredible in the way that you've all managed to tell this story over the course of several years in such a powerful way. And thank you so much for sharing all of this, Dominic.
No, thank you so much. This was delightful. Thank you for really insightful questions that I haven't been fielded before. You really deep dived and did your research. Thank you so much.